Sarah Martinez never looked like someone who would change military history. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall with gentle brown eyes and a soft smile, she grew up in a small farming town in Oklahoma, where the biggest excitement was Friday night football games. Her father worked long days fixing tractors at the local repair shop, while her mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school down the road. The Martinez family lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with peeling paint and a front porch that creaked whenever someone walked across it. Money was always tight, but they had something more valuable than wealth. They had each other. Every evening after dinner, Sarah would sit on that old porch with her grandfather, listening to his stories about serving in Vietnam. Grandpa Joe had been a Marine sniper decades ago, and though he rarely talked about the war itself, he loved sharing tales about the precision and discipline required for long-range shooting. His weathered hands would gesture as he described the patience needed to wait for the perfect moment, the steady breathing that could make or break a shot, and the mental focus that separated good shooters from extraordinary ones. Sarah hung on to every word. While other kids her age were playing video games or scrolling through social media, she found herself fascinated by the technical aspects of marksmanship. Her grandfather noticed her genuine interest and began teaching her the basics using an old .22 rifle that had belonged to his own father. They would spend hours in the backfield behind their house, setting up tin cans and paper targets. At first, Sarah could barely hit anything. Her hands would shake, her breathing was erratic, and she struggled to keep the rifle steady. But she never gave up. Day after day, week after week, she practiced with the determination of someone twice her age. Grandpa Joe watched with growing amazement as this quiet teenage girl developed skills that most people never achieve even with professional training. By the time Sarah turned 16, she could consistently hit targets at distances that impressed even the local hunting enthusiasts. Word spread through their small town about the Martinez girl who could outshoot men who had been hunting for decades. The local gun store owner, a former Army veteran named Bill Thompson, heard the rumors and decided to see for himself. What he witnessed that Saturday afternoon left him speechless. Sarah calmly loaded her rifle, adjusted her scope, and proceeded to place 5 consecutive shots within a 2-inch circle at 300 yards. Bill had seen plenty of good shooters over the years, but this level of precision from a teenage girl was something entirely different. "Have you ever thought about the military?" Bill asked her afterward, still staring at the target in disbelief. Sarah had considered it, but college seemed like the expected path. Her parents had always emphasized education, and she was doing well in school with plans to study engineering. The idea of joining the Marines felt like a distant dream, something that belonged to other people from different backgrounds. However, financial reality began to set in during her senior year of high school. The family's economic situation had worsened when her father injured his back and couldn't work for several months. College tuition seemed increasingly impossible, and Sarah watched her parents stress about money night after night. She began researching military options, initially thinking about the educational benefits and steady pay. The Marine recruiter who visited her high school was Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, a tough-talking woman from Texas who had served 3 tours overseas. During their conversation, Sarah mentioned her interest in marksmanship, expecting it to be treated as a minor hobby. Instead, Sergeant Rodriguez's entire demeanor changed. "Show me what you can do," she said simply. The following weekend, Sergeant Rodriguez accompanied Sarah to the local shooting range, bringing along some official Marine Corps equipment and targets. What happened next would later be described in Rodriguez's report as the most impressive display of natural shooting ability I have encountered in 15 years of service. Sarah didn't just hit the targets, she dominated them. At 100 yards, 200 yards, even 400 yards, her shots clustered together with mechanical precision. Her breathing was controlled, her stance was instinctively correct, and her mental focus was absolutely unshakable. Between shots, she would calmly adjust her scope and prepare for the next target without any visible signs of stress or excitement. Sergeant Rodriguez made several phone calls that evening, speaking with contacts at various Marine training facilities. The feedback was consistent. If this girl's abilities were genuine, she needed to be fast-tracked into the Marine Corps sniper program immediately. The recruitment process moved quickly after that. Sarah's test scores were excellent, her physical fitness was better than average, and her psychological evaluations showed the kind of mental stability and focus that the military valued highly. More importantly, her marksmanship abilities were documented and verified by multiple officials. Her parents were initially hesitant about their daughter joining the military, especially the Marines with their reputation for intense training and dangerous deployments. But they could see the opportunities it would provide, not just financially, but for Sarah to develop her unique talents in ways that would never be possible in civilian life. The night before Sarah left for boot camp, she sat on the front porch with Grandpa Joe one last time. The old Marine handed her a small notebook filled with decades of handwritten notes about shooting techniques, weather considerations, and mental preparation strategies. "Your grandmother always said you had something special inside you," he told her quietly. "I think she would be proud to see where you're headed." Sarah carefully placed the notebook in her duffel bag alongside her few personal belongings. She had no idea that within months, she would be breaking records that had stood for generations, or that her name would eventually be spoken with reverence in Marine training facilities around the world. As the bus pulled away from her small Oklahoma town the next morning, Sarah pressed her face against the window for one last look at the place where it all began. The girl who had learned to shoot tin cans in a backfield was about to discover just how extraordinary her gift truly was. The bus arrived at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island at 3:47 a.m. on a muggy South Carolina morning. Sarah stepped off with 43 other recruits, immediately hit by the humid air and the sound of drill instructors shouting commands that seemed to come from every direction at once. The culture shock was immediate and overwhelming. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had been breaking in new recruits for 8 years, and he thought he had seen every type of young person who walked through those gates. Farm kids, city kids, college, dropouts, high school athletes. They all followed predictable patterns during the 13 weeks of transformation that lay ahead. Sarah Martinez looked like just another quiet small-town girl who would probably struggle with the physical demands and intense pressure. He couldn't have been more wrong. The first few weeks of boot camp were brutal for everyone. The daily routine started at 4:30 a.m. and included endless physical training, weapons handling, combat drills, and classroom instruction that lasted well into the evening. Recruits were constantly tested, constantly pushed beyond their perceived limits, and constantly reminded that most people who started this journey never made it to graduation. Sarah surprised everyone by adapting to the physical challenges faster than expected. While she wasn't the strongest or fastest recruit in her platoon, her mental toughness was exceptional. When other recruits were breaking down under pressure, crying from exhaustion, or getting overwhelmed by the constant demands, Sarah remained calm and focused. The real revelation came during week 6 when the platoon was introduced to marksmanship training. Every Marine, regardless of their eventual job specialty, must qualify as a marksman with the standard issue rifle. Most recruits found this challenging, requiring weeks of instruction and practice to achieve even basic competency. Sergeant Torres watched from behind the firing line as Sarah approached her weapon for the first time. The M16A4 service rifle was different from the hunting rifles she had used back home, but the fundamental principles remained the same. She examined the weapon carefully, checking its condition and familiarizing herself with its weight and balance. When the command came to assume firing positions, Sarah dropped into a textbook-prone stance that looked like it had been practiced for years. Her breathing became slow and regular. Her grip was firm but not tense, and her body alignment was absolutely perfect. The other recruits were still fumbling with their equipment when Sarah fired her first shot. Bullseye. Dead center. Sergeant. Torres assumed it was beginner's luck and continued observing the other recruits. Sarah's second shot hit within millimeters of the first, then her third. By the time she had fired 10 rounds, there was essentially one ragged hole in the center of her target at 200 yards. "Cease fire," Torres called out, walking quickly toward Sarah's position. He examined her target through binoculars, then looked at her weapon to make sure there wasn't some kind of malfunction, causing impossible accuracy. Everything was normal, except for Sarah's shooting. Word spread quickly through the training base. Drill instructors from other platoons found excuses to observe Sarah during subsequent shooting exercises. Officers who rarely visited the rifle range started showing up to witness what recruits were calling the Oklahoma phenomenon. Each session only reinforced their amazement. Sarah consistently achieved perfect or near-perfect scores on every marksmanship test, often shooting patterns that the instructors had never seen from anyone, including experienced Marines with years of training. Her performance was so far beyond normal recruit standards that special protocols had to be implemented just to properly document her abilities. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the officer in charge of weapons training, had been a competitive shooter before joining the Marines 15 years earlier. She understood better than most what separated good marksmen from exceptional ones. After watching Sarah for several sessions, she requested a private meeting with the recruit. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Captain Walsh asked directly. Sarah explained her background with her grandfather, the years of practice in Oklahoma, and her natural fascination with precision shooting. She answered every question honestly, having no idea that her responses were being carefully evaluated by someone who was already making plans that would change her entire military career. Captain Walsh made a phone call that evening to a contact at Marine Corps Base Quantico in Virginia. The person on the other end of the line was Master Sergeant James Mitchell, the senior instructor for the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, one of the most elite and demanding programs in the entire military. "I need you to take a look at someone," Captain Walsh told him. "I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never seen anything like her." Master Sergeant Mitchell was skeptical. He had heard similar claims before about supposedly exceptional recruits who turned out to be merely above average when tested against true professional standards. However, Captain Walsh had an excellent reputation, and her judgment was respected throughout the Marine Corps. Arrangements were made for Sarah to participate in an unofficial evaluation during her final weeks of boot camp. Master Sergeant Mitchell arrived at Parris Island on a Tuesday morning, bringing specialized equipment and ammunition that far exceeded the standard training materials used for regular recruits. The test began at 100 yards with stationary targets, then progressed to 300 yards, 500 yards, and eventually 800 yards with various wind conditions and lighting challenges. Sarah approached each stage with the same calm focus she had displayed since arriving at boot camp, treating the evaluation as simply another training exercise. Master Sergeant Mitchell watched through a spotting scope as Sarah engaged targets, at distances where many trained snipers struggled to maintain consistent accuracy. Her shot groups remained impossibly tight. Her adjustments for wind and elevation were instinctively correct, and her overall performance was unlike anything he had witnessed in 23 years of military service. During the final stage of the evaluation, Mitchell set up a scenario that he typically reserved for advanced sniper students. Multiple targets at varying distances that had to be engaged in a specific sequence within a limited time frame. This exercise combined marksmanship skills with tactical thinking and pressure management in ways that overwhelmed most people. Sarah studied the target layout for exactly 90 seconds, mentally calculating distances, wind effects, and the optimal sequence for engagement. When Mitchell gave the signal to begin, she moved through the course with mechanical precision, engaging each target with single, perfectly placed shots. Total time, 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Total hits, 12 out of 12 targets. Average group size, less than 2 inches at distances ranging from 200 to 700 yards. Master Sergeant Mitchell had been testing and training snipers for over 2 decades. He had worked with Marines who went on to become legends in the special operations community. He had seen natural talent combined with intensive training produce remarkable results, but he had never seen anything like Sarah Martinez. That evening, he placed a secure phone call to Marine Corps headquarters, speaking directly with the colonel who oversaw all sniper training programs. The conversation was brief and to the point. There was a recruit at Parris Island who needed to be immediately transferred to advanced training upon graduation. Sarah completed boot camp with honors, earning recognition as the top marksman in her class by margins that would have been considered impossible if they hadn't been witnessed and documented by multiple instructors. She had no idea that her military career was about to take a path that no Marine had ever traveled before. 3 weeks after graduating from boot camp, Sarah found herself at Marine Corps Base Quantico, standing outside a building that most Marines would never see the inside of. The Scout Sniper School was legendary throughout the military, a place where only the most exceptional marksmen could even attempt to earn their place among the Corps' elite shooters. Master Sergeant James Mitchell emerged from the building exactly at 800 hours, his weathered face showing no emotion as he looked over the small group of Marines who had been selected for sniper training. There were 8 of them in total, all with excellent shooting records and strong recommendations from their previous units. All except Sarah, who was the youngest person ever to be directly admitted to the program straight from boot camp. "Listen up." Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of proven performance. 60% of you will not complete this program. Of those who do finish, only half will meet the standards required to become operational snipers. This is not regular marksmanship training. This is about becoming a precision weapon system. The next 12 weeks would test every aspect of their abilities: physical endurance, mental toughness, technical knowledge, and shooting skills that went far beyond anything they had previously experienced. The curriculum covered ballistics, meteorology, camouflage, fieldcraft, observation techniques, and advanced marksmanship under conditions that simulated real combat scenarios. Sarah quickly discovered that her natural shooting ability, while exceptional, was just the beginning of what she needed to master. Sniper training involved much more than hitting targets at long range. Students had to learn to move unseen across various types of terrain, to remain motionless for hours while observing enemy positions, and to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. The physical demands were intense. Daily training began before dawn and often continued well into the evening, involving long ruck marches with heavy equipment, crawling through mud and undergrowth, and maintaining shooting positions that would leave most people cramping within minutes. Several students dropped out during the first month, unable to handle the combination of physical and mental stress. Sarah not only survived these challenges but seemed to thrive under the pressure. Her small frame was deceptive. Years of farm, work, and natural athletic ability had given her surprising strength and endurance. More importantly, her mental approach to difficult situations remained calm and methodical, traits that served her well when other students became frustrated or overwhelmed. The shooting portions of the training revealed the full extent of her extraordinary abilities. While other students struggled with advanced concepts like elevation calculations and wind reading, Sarah absorbed the information quickly and applied it with immediate success. Instructors found themselves running out of progressively difficult challenges to present to her. Staff Sergeant David Kim, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who served as one of the primary marksmanship instructors, began creating specialized exercises specifically for Sarah. Standard training scenarios had become too easy for her, requiring the development of new tests that pushed her capabilities toward their limits. During week 7 of the program, the students faced their first major evaluation, a complex shooting exercise that combined long-range precision with time pressure and multiple variables. The course required engaging 12 targets at distances from 300 to 1,000 yards, with different wind conditions affecting each shot, and only 90 minutes to complete the entire sequence. Most students approached this challenge with visible anxiety. The exercise was designed to be extremely difficult, with passing scores typically achieved by fewer than half of the participants. Failure meant additional remedial training and the possibility of being dropped from the program entirely. Sarah treated the evaluation like every other training exercise she had faced. She spent the first 20 minutes carefully studying each target position, calculating distances and wind effects, and developing a systematic approach for moving through the course efficiently. When the exercise began, she moved with the same calm precision that had characterized all her previous shooting. Each target fell to a single, perfectly placed shot. Her movement between positions was smooth and economical, showing none of the rushed desperation that affected some of the other students. Total time, 67 minutes. Total hits, 12 out of 12 targets. Average group size, 1.3 inches, across all distances. Staff Sergeant Kim had administered this particular test dozens of times over his career. The previous record had been 9 hits out of 12 targets in 84 minutes, achieved by a Marine who went on to become one of the most respected snipers in the Corps. Sarah hadn't just beaten the record, she had obliterated it. Word of her performance spread quickly through the small, tight-knit community of Marine snipers. Instructors from other military branches began finding excuses to observe training sessions at Quantico. Phone calls were made to senior officers who specialized in special operations planning. But the real test came during Week 10, when students faced the culminating exercise known simply as the stalk. This scenario required them to move undetected across 2 miles of varied terrain, establish a concealed firing position within 200 yards of instructor observers, and engage a specific target without being spotted. The stalk was where many otherwise capable students failed. It demanded the integration of all skills learned during the previous weeks: camouflage, movement, observation, and precision shooting under the most challenging conditions possible. Students had to remain completely hidden while crawling through open fields, dense woods, and rocky terrain, all while carrying full equipment and maintaining the mental focus required for accurate long-range shooting. Sarah began the exercise at dawn, moving across the starting line with 7 other students who had survived the program to this point. The weather conditions were deliberately challenging: intermittent rain, variable winds, and overcast skies that made range estimation more difficult. For the next 6 hours, she moved like a ghost through the countryside. Her camouflage techniques, learned and practiced obsessively during the previous weeks, made her virtually invisible even to the experienced instructors who were specifically looking for student movements. Her route selection demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed observers who had expected her youth and inexperience to create problems. When Sarah reached her final firing position, she was completely undetected and perfectly positioned for the required shot. The target was an 8-inch circle at 750 yards, partially obscured by vegetation and affected by swirling winds that changed direction every few minutes. She observed the target area for 23 minutes, studying wind patterns and waiting for optimal conditions. When she finally took the shot, the bullet struck dead center of the target with an accuracy that left the observing instructors speechless. Master Sergeant Mitchell watched the entire exercise through high-powered binoculars from a concealed observation post. In 23 years of running sniper training, he had never seen a student demonstrate such complete mastery of every required skill simultaneously. That evening, he placed another secure phone call to Marine Corps headquarters, this time requesting permission to enter Sarah Martinez into the advanced competition shooting program, a level of training reserved for Marines who would eventually compete against the world's best military marksmen. The response came back within 24 hours. Permission granted, along with authorization to fast-track her through specialized training that would prepare her for challenges that no Marine had ever attempted before. Sarah had no idea that her performance was about to open doors to opportunities that existed at the very highest levels of military marksmanship. She was about to face challenges that would test the absolute limits of human shooting ability. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a senior officer who rarely visited the Scout Sniper training facility. Master Sergeant Mitchell opened the sealed envelope and read the contents twice before fully comprehending what he was being asked to do. The orders came directly from the Commandant of the Marine Corps and were unlike anything he had seen in his decades of military service. Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez was being selected to attempt a series of shooting challenges that had been deemed impossible by military experts. These were not training exercises or standard qualifications, but rather a collection of shots that had never been successfully completed by any military marksman in recorded history. The challenges had been developed years earlier by a committee of military shooting experts, ballistics specialists, and mathematics professors who wanted to establish the theoretical limits of human marksmanship ability. The 5 shots were designed to test every aspect of precision shooting under conditions that pushed beyond what most people believed could be achieved. Colonel Patricia Henderson arrived at Quantico 3 days later to personally oversee the attempt. As the Marine Corps' senior expert on advanced marksmanship, She understood better than most what these challenges represented. Previous attempts by some of the military's most accomplished snipers had resulted in failure, sometimes by margins so wide that questions arose about whether the shots were even physically possible. "These aren't normal shooting tests, Colonel," Henderson explained to Sarah during their initial meeting. "Each challenge represents a different type of impossibility: extreme distance, difficult angles, multiple variables, time pressure, and environmental factors that would defeat most computer-controlled shooting systems." The first challenge was known as the mile shot, engaging a target at 1,760 yards, exactly 1 mile, under field conditions with a standard military rifle. At that distance, factors like bullet drop, wind drift, temperature, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth became significant variables that had to be calculated precisely. Previous attempts had failed because of the sheer number of factors that could affect bullet trajectory over such an extreme range. Sarah spent 3 days studying the ballistics calculations, weather patterns, and environmental conditions that would affect the shot. She worked with meteorologists to understand wind patterns at various altitudes along the bullet's flight path, consulted with physicists about atmospheric density effects, and practiced with equipment that measured her shooting position down to fractions of degrees. On the morning of the attempt, conditions were nearly perfect: minimal wind, stable temperature, and clear visibility. The target was a regulation-size bullseye placed exactly 1 mile from Sarah's firing position, verified by multiple measurement systems to ensure accuracy. Sarah approached the shot with the same methodical preparation she had shown throughout her training. She spent 45 minutes studying conditions, making calculations, and adjusting her scope for the extreme distance. When she finally settled into her firing position, there was complete silence among the dozens of observers who had gathered to witness the attempt. The shot took nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in shooting terms that allowed time for multiple variables to affect the bullet's path. Through high-powered spotting scopes, the observers watched as Sarah's bullet struck the target just 2 inches from dead center. Success on the first impossible shot. The second challenge was called the angle shot, hitting a target positioned at an extreme upward angle that required calculations most shooters had never attempted. The target was placed on a cliff face 800 yards away and 400 feet higher than the shooting position, creating ballistic complications that defeated even advanced computer modeling systems. Shooting uphill at extreme angles required different mathematical approaches than normal horizontal shots. Gravity affected the bullet differently. Scope adjustments had to account for the angle's impact on trajectory, and the effective distance was shorter than the actual measured distance in ways that confused most marksmen. Sarah approached this challenge by essentially relearning ballistics from a mathematical perspective she had never needed before. She worked with engineers and physicists to understand how bullet flight changed when gravity was no longer perpendicular to the line of sight, spending hours with calculators and ballistics software. When she took the shot, the bullet followed, a perfect arc through the air, striking the target dead center despite the complex calculations required. Observers later described it as watching physics principles demonstrated with surgical precision. 2 impossible shots completed successfully. The third challenge pushed into territory that seemed more like science fiction than marksmanship: the moving target shot. This required hitting a target that was moving at 40 miles per hour while positioned 600 yards away from the shooter. The target moved in an unpredictable pattern, changing direction and speed in ways that made traditional lead calculations nearly impossible. Previous attempts at this challenge had failed because marksmen couldn't predict where the target would be by the time their bullet arrived. The mathematical complexity of calculating lead distances for unpredictably moving targets had defeated even computer-assisted shooting systems. Sarah studied the target's movement patterns for hours, looking for subtle tendencies and timing patterns that could be predicted. She discovered that while the target's direction changes appeared random, there were micro-patterns in timing that could be anticipated by someone with exceptional observational skills. When she took the shot, she led the target by an amount that seemed impossible to calculate. The bullet intercepted the moving target exactly as she had predicted, demonstrating an understanding of complex ballistics that amazed the observing experts. 3 impossible shots completed. The fourth challenge was the precision shot, hitting. A target that measured only 2 inches in diameter at 200 yards. At that distance, a 2-inch target was barely visible even through high-powered scopes, and the level of precision required exceeded what most people believed human hands could achieve. This shot required not just accuracy, but consistency that allowed for no margin of error. Wind effects that would be negligible at shorter distances became critical variables, and even the shooter's heartbeat could affect bullet placement enough to cause a miss. Sarah approached this challenge by essentially becoming a human shooting machine. She controlled her breathing, heart rate, and muscle tension with techniques that bordered on meditation. When she fired, her body was so perfectly still that monitoring equipment barely detected any movement. The bullet struck the tiny target dead center, achieving precision that the observing ballistics experts later described as beyond what they thought was humanly possible. 4. Impossible shots completed successfully. The fifth and final challenge was the ultimate shot, a combination of all previous difficulties that required hitting a 4-inch target at 2,500 yards while positioned at an upward angle, with wind conditions that changed every few seconds, within a time limit that prevented extensive calculations. This shot represented the absolute theoretical limit of human marksmanship ability. Previous attempts hadn't even come close to success, leading some experts to conclude that the challenge was genuinely impossible regardless of skill level. Sarah had 30 minutes to study conditions and take the shot. She spent 28 minutes observing, calculating, and preparing, leaving herself only 2 minutes for the actual shooting sequence. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the bullet traveled through changing wind conditions, compensated for the upward angle, and struck the 4-inch target at a distance where most people couldn't even see such a small object clearly. Direct hit, dead center. Colonel Henderson stood in stunned silence for several moments before speaking. In 40 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments and extensive experience with the world's best marksmen, she had never witnessed anything that approached Sarah's demonstration. All 5 impossible shots had been completed successfully by a 19-year-old Marine who had learned to shoot tin cans in an Oklahoma farm field less than 2 years earlier. Word of Sarah's achievement spread through military circles within hours. Phone calls were made to the Pentagon, special operations commanders, and international military attachés who specialized in marksmanship competition. Sarah Martinez had not just broken records, she had redefined what human beings were capable of achieving with precision shooting. Her name would be remembered in Marine Corps history, but more immediately, her unprecedented demonstration of marksmanship had caught the attention of people who operated at the highest levels of military planning and special operations. The phone call came at 06:45 hours on a Wednesday morning, waking Sarah from the deepest sleep she had experienced in months. The voice on the other end belonged to General Robert McKenzie, a man whose reputation extended far beyond the Marine Corps into the highest levels of military special operations planning. Lance Corporal Martinez, you have 24 hours to report to a classified location for a mission briefing that will change the course of your military career. The general's voice carried an authority that made further explanation unnecessary. Transportation has been arranged. Pack light and tell no one where you're going. Within hours, Sarah found herself on a military transport aircraft heading toward a destination that wasn't marked on her travel orders. The other passengers were clearly special operations personnel, quiet, intensely focused individuals who carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to handling impossible situations. The aircraft landed at a facility that existed on no public maps, surrounded by security measures that indicated its importance to national defense operations. Sarah was escorted to a briefing room where she encountered an assembly of people who represented the absolute pinnacle of military expertise. General McKenzie stood at the front of the room alongside officers from multiple branches of the military, representatives from intelligence agencies, and technical specialists whose job titles weren't disclosed. The briefing material spread across the conference table suggested a level of operational complexity that went far beyond anything Sarah had previously encountered. What you accomplished at Quantico has created opportunities that didn't exist before. General McKenzie began his presentation. Your demonstration of marksmanship abilities has opened doors to missions that were previously considered impossible due to the precision requirements involved. The briefing revealed a world of special operations that existed beyond what most military personnel ever experienced. There were missions requiring shooting accuracy that exceeded what any previous marksman had been able to achieve. Scenarios where the difference between success and failure could be measured in millimeters, at distances measured in miles. Sarah learned about operations where political situations required precision that left no room for collateral damage, where targets had to be eliminated with surgical accuracy that prevented any possibility of unintended consequences. These were situations where the difference between a good shot and a perfect shot could determine the success or failure of operations affecting national security. "We're not just talking about standard sniper missions," explained Colonel Jennifer Hayes, a special operations planning specialist with over 20 years of experience in the field. "We're discussing scenarios that require capabilities that we previously thought were impossible to achieve." The technical briefings that followed revealed the full scope of what Sarah's abilities made possible. Engineers had designed specialized equipment that could take advantage of her unprecedented accuracy. Ballistics experts had calculated engagement scenarios that had never been attempted, and intelligence specialists had identified targets that could only be addressed by someone with her unique capabilities. Dr. Michael Richardson, a physicist who consulted on advanced ballistic systems, presented calculations that demonstrated how Sarah's shooting abilities opened possibilities that changed fundamental assumptions about what military marksmen could accomplish. Previous operational planning had been constrained by the known limits of human marksmanship, limits that Sarah had conclusively shattered. "The mathematical precision you demonstrated creates tactical options that simply didn't exist before," Dr. Richardson explained, showing computer models that illustrated engagement scenarios at distances and under conditions that had previously been considered fantasy rather than operational reality. Sarah found herself being introduced to equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology. Specialized rifles that had been designed specifically to take advantage of extraordinary marksmanship abilities, ballistics computers that could calculate solutions for shots that most people couldn't even attempt, and support systems that enabled precision shooting under conditions that would defeat conventional marksmen. The training regimen that followed was unlike anything that existed in standard military programs. Sarah worked with experts who had developed techniques specifically for marksmen, operating at the absolute limits of human capability. The exercises combined physical conditioning, mental preparation, and technical education in ways that pushed her abilities toward theoretical perfection. Master Chief Petty Officer Lisa Zhang, a Navy SEAL instructor who specialized in extreme condition marksmanship, became Sarah's primary mentor during this phase of training. Zhang had spent 15 years developing techniques for shooting under conditions that most people would consider impossible, in darkness, during storms, while under physical stress, and in scenarios where a single missed shot would result in mission failure. "Everything you've done up to this point has been preparation for what comes next," Zhang told Sarah during one of their training sessions. "Now we're going to teach you how to be perfect when perfection is the only acceptable outcome." The training involved scenarios that seemed designed to break both physical and mental limitations. Sarah learned to shoot accurately while exhausted, under extreme time pressure, and in environmental conditions that would defeat most marksmen. She practiced engaging targets that were barely visible, moving in unpredictable patterns, and positioned in ways that required calculations that existed at the edge of mathematical possibility. Throughout this training, Sarah's performance continued to exceed expectations that were already based on her unprecedented previous achievements. Instructors who had worked with the military's most elite marksmen found themselves constantly revising their assumptions about what human beings could achieve with precision shooting. The psychological evaluations conducted during this period revealed characteristics that helped explain Sarah's extraordinary abilities. Her capacity for sustained concentration exceeded normal human ranges. Her visual processing skills were exceptional even by military standards, and her ability to perform complex calculations under pressure suggested cognitive abilities that were genuinely rare. Dr. Amanda Foster, a military psychologist who specialized in studying exceptional performers, spent weeks analyzing Sarah's mental approaches to marksmanship. Her findings indicated that Sarah's success resulted from a combination of natural abilities, learned techniques, and psychological characteristics that created a perfect foundation for extreme precision shooting. She doesn't just have exceptional hand-eye coordination and visual acuity, Dr. Foster explained in her report. She has cognitive processing abilities that allow her to integrate multiple complex variables simultaneously while maintaining the mental state required for perfect precision. It's a combination that we've never documented before. As Sarah's specialized training neared completion, she began receiving briefings about actual missions that would require her unique capabilities. These weren't hypothetical scenarios or training exercises. They were real-world operations where her unprecedented marksmanship skills could accomplish objectives that had been considered impossible by conventional military planning. The first mission briefing took place in a secure conference room deep within the classified facility. Intelligence officers presented a situation involving a high-value target who had positioned himself in a location that made traditional approaches impossible. The target was protected by geography, security measures, and political considerations that required a solution of surgical precision. Standard sniper techniques won't work, explained the intelligence briefer, showing satellite photographs and architectural diagrams. The shot distance exceeds normal operational ranges, the angle is extreme, and there's a narrow window of opportunity that lasts less than 30 seconds. We need someone who can guarantee a first shot hit under conditions that have never been attempted operationally. Sarah studied the mission parameters with the same methodical approach she had brought to every previous challenge. The required shot was at the absolute edge of what her training had prepared her for, nearly 2 miles through difficult terrain, with environmental factors that would change throughout the day, and timing constraints that allowed for no second chances. The mission planning process revealed the full extent of how her abilities were changing military operations. Support teams were being assembled specifically to enable her unique capabilities. Equipment was being modified to meet requirements that had never existed before, and contingency plans were being developed around the assumption that she could achieve precision that exceeded all previous military standards. General Mackenzie personally oversaw the final briefing sessions, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of what Sarah was being asked to attempt. This mission represents a new category of special operations, he told her directly. Your successful completion of the impossible shots at Quantico has created opportunities that didn't exist in military planning before. But with those opportunities comes responsibility that goes beyond anything any marksman has ever faced. The weight of that responsibility became clear as Sarah learned more about the mission's importance. The successful completion of her assignment could prevent an international crisis that threatened regional stability. Failure would not only result in mission failure, but could also close the door on future operations that depended on capabilities that only she possessed. Sarah's response to this pressure was characteristic of everything she had demonstrated throughout her military career. Instead of being overwhelmed by the unprecedented responsibility, she approached the challenge with the same calm focus that had enabled her to break every previous record. Her preparation became more intense and systematic than anything she had done before. Working with a team of specialists that included ballistics experts, meteorologists, intelligence analysts, and equipment technicians, Sarah spent weeks preparing for every conceivable variable that could affect the mission. Weather patterns were studied and predicted. Equipment was tested and retested, and backup plans were developed for scenarios that might require split-second adaptations. The night before the mission launch, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the small notebook that her grandfather had given her before she left Oklahoma. The handwritten pages contained wisdom about shooting, patience, and mental preparation that had guided her from the very beginning of her journey. The simple advice from a small-town Marine veteran had somehow prepared her for challenges that existed at the highest levels of military operations. When she finally closed the notebook and prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Less than 2 years ago, she had been a farm girl from Oklahoma with a natural talent for hitting tin cans with an old rifle. Tomorrow, she would attempt a mission that represented the absolute pinnacle of military marksmanship. The impossible shots at Quantico had been the beginning, not the end, of demonstrating what human precision shooting could achieve. Now she was about to discover whether her unprecedented abilities could translate into operational success in the real world, where the stakes were measured not in records broken, but in lives saved and conflicts prevented. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she had no way of knowing that her mission would not only succeed beyond all expectations, but would establish new standards for what special operations could accomplish. Her journey from small-town farm girl to military legend was about to reach its defining moment. The mission launched at 0200 hours on a moonless night in October, with Sarah and her support team deploying to a location that would remain classified for decades to come. The 12-hour journey involved multiple forms of transportation, each segment carefully planned to position her team at the optimal location for what military planners were calling Operation Needle's Eye. Sarah's shooting position was established on a mountainside that provided line of sight to the target location nearly 2 miles away. The position had been selected after weeks of satellite reconnaissance, terrain analysis, and ballistics calculations that pushed the boundaries of what military science could predict. Every variable had been considered, measured, and planned for in ways that had never been attempted for such an extreme engagement. The support team that accompanied Sarah represented the pinnacle of military technical expertise. Master Sergeant Chen, a communications specialist with 15 years of special operations experience, would coordinate with intelligence assets to provide real-time updates on target movement and environmental conditions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, an expert in advanced ballistic systems, would operate the specialized equipment that would enable Sarah to make calculations for the unprecedented shot distance. Dr. Williams, a meteorologist who had been studying weather patterns in the target area for months, would provide minute-by-minute updates on wind conditions at various altitudes along the bullet's flight path. Captain Morrison, a special operations officer with extensive experience in high-risk missions, would serve as overall team leader and coordinate with command authorities throughout the operation. The target window opened at 1347 hours local time, when intelligence assets confirmed that the high-value target had moved to the predicted location. Sarah had been in position for over 6 hours, studying conditions and making final adjustments to her equipment. The waiting had been part of the mission plan, ensuring that she was perfectly prepared when the narrow opportunity presented itself. Through her specialized scope, Sarah could barely make out the target location at nearly 2 miles distance. The environmental conditions were within acceptable parameters, but barely. Wind speeds were at the upper limit of what her calculations could compensate for, and atmospheric conditions were changing in ways that required constant adjustments to her scope settings. Wind is steady at 12 miles per hour from the northwest at your position, Dr. Williams reported through her earpiece. Variable between 8 and 15 miles per hour at mid-range altitudes, shifting to steady 14 miles per hour from the west at target distance. Sarah made minute adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for the complex wind patterns that would affect her bullet during its nearly 4-second flight to the target. The calculations involved mathematics that existed at the edge of what could be done without computer assistance, requiring her to integrate multiple variables simultaneously while maintaining the perfect mental state required for extreme precision shooting. Target has moved to position Alpha. Master Sergeant Chen's voice was calm and professional despite the tension that filled the mountainside position. You have approximately 40 seconds of opportunity before he moves to cover. Sarah's breathing became deep and regular, her heart rate slowing to the controlled rhythm that she had practiced thousands of times during her specialized training. Her body position was perfectly stable, every muscle adjusted to provide the rock-solid platform required for shooting at distances that exceeded normal human capabilities. The scope crosshairs settled on the barely visible target nearly 2 miles away. Through the specialized optics, Sarah could make out the figure that intelligence had identified as one of the most dangerous individuals threatening regional stability. This single shot could prevent a conflict that might otherwise escalate into international crisis. 15 seconds remaining before the target would move to cover. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger with the same methodical precision that had characterized every shot she had taken since learning to shoot tin cans in Oklahoma. Years of training, months of preparation, and a lifetime of natural ability focused into a single moment that would be measured in fractions of seconds. The rifle fired with a sound that echoed across the mountainside, sending a specially designed bullet on a trajectory that represented the absolute pinnacle of human marksmanship capability. The bullet traveled through changing atmospheric conditions, compensating for wind patterns that shifted at different altitudes, following an arc that had been calculated to mathematical precision. 3.7 seconds later, the bullet struck its target with accuracy that exceeded even the most optimistic predictions made by the mission planners. Through high-powered observation equipment, the support team watched as the target dropped, instantly, eliminated with surgical precision that left no doubt about the mission's success. Target neutralized. Captain Morrison's voice carried a mixture of professional satisfaction and genuine amazement. Perfect hit. Mission accomplished. The extraction from the shooting position took place according to carefully rehearsed plans, with the team moving quickly but quietly toward the pickup location, where transportation waited to begin their journey back to the classified facility. Throughout the extraction process, Sarah maintained the same calm focus that had enabled her to complete the impossible shot, treating the mission's success as simply another step in her continuing development as a marksman. The debriefing sessions that followed revealed the full significance of what Sarah had accomplished. Intelligence analysts confirmed that the mission had prevented a planned attack that could have destabilized an entire region, potentially saving thousands of lives and preventing an international crisis that might have required years to resolve. General Mackenzie personally conducted the final debriefing, reviewing every aspect of the mission's execution and its strategic implications. This operation has demonstrated capabilities that change fundamental assumptions about what special operations can accomplish, he told Sarah directly. Your success has opened possibilities for future missions that were previously considered impossible. The technical analysis of Sarah's shot provided data that would influence military marksmanship training for decades to come. Ballistics experts studied every aspect of the bullet's flight path, environmental factors, and equipment performance to understand exactly how such extreme precision had been achieved. The information would be incorporated into advanced training programs and equipment development projects that would benefit future generations of military marksmen. Awards and recognition followed, though most of the details remained classified due to the sensitive nature of the mission. Sarah received decorations that recognized her unprecedented achievement, while protecting the operational details that would remain secret for national security reasons. More importantly, her success established her as the founding member of a new category of special operations marksmen, individuals whose capabilities enabled missions that had previously existed only in theoretical planning documents. Training programs were developed around the standards she had demonstrated, and selection processes were created to identify other potential candidates who might possess similar extraordinary abilities. 6 months after Operation Needle's Eye, Sarah found herself back at Marine Corps Base Quantico, but in a completely different role. Instead of being a student learning marksmanship techniques, she had become an instructor responsible for developing training programs that would produce the next generation of precision shooters capable of attempting the impossible. The small notebook that her grandfather had given her before she left Oklahoma now sat on the desk in her instructor's office, its handwritten pages having guided her from tin cans in a farm field to achievements that redefined what human beings could accomplish with precision shooting. The simple wisdom from a small-town Marine veteran had somehow contained the foundation for capabilities that existed at the absolute pinnacle of military expertise. Students who attended Sarah's advanced marksmanship classes would hear stories about the quiet girl from Oklahoma who had broken every impossible record, completed missions that existed at the edge of human capability, and established standards that would challenge exceptional marksmen for generations to come. Her legacy extended far beyond the records she had broken or the missions she had completed. Sarah Martinez had demonstrated that the limits of human achievement were often just barriers waiting for someone with the right combination of natural ability, dedicated training, and unwavering focus to break through them. The impossible shots that had made her famous were just the beginning of a career that would redefine what military marksmanship could accomplish, inspiring future generations of Marines to push beyond what they thought was possible and attempt their own versions of the impossible.